I think we might be the stupidest animals on earth because we put ourselves through so much pain and rigor willingly to get nothing at the end of it but pride. Or does that make us the smartest? First book of the year that I have read, or that I'm going to talk about at least. I did read another book. The Art of Running, Learning to Run Like a Greek by Andrea Marcolongo. I picked up this book actually for my dad, who likes to run and frequently is reading books that kind of fall into the vein of literature about topics that he likes. So people who have done the things that he likes to do, people who have accomplished great feats, people who are exploring those themes. And I honestly thought that this book was going to be more of a book about running and how to run better and how to run like a Greek than what it actually is, which is part memoir, part history. And it's Andrea Marcolongo's attempt at figuring out why we as humans run. Not just run, but long distance run. Why do we run marathons? Why do we push ourselves to the extreme? Why do we keep it going further in things like ultra marathons and Ironmans and triathlons and pentathlons? And what would the Greeks have to say about it? What would the original person who ran the marathon, Philippides, say about the current marathons that we run? And as a classicist, as someone who studies history, antiquities in particular, Marcolongo has a really unique perspective as someone who decides to sign up for a marathon and someone who studies the people who created the Olympics and marathons. This book follows Andrea Marcolongo on her journey of casual running and how that turned into her running the Athens Marathon. We know the story of Philippides, who ran the 25 miles from Marathon, Greece, to Athens to deliver the message, "We have won." And the legend goes that he immediately, upon arriving, said those words, "We have won," and collapsed and died. Andrea here, as the person who studies the antiquities and who has probably heard this story a million times, why do we do it? If the first person who ever did it died doing it, why do we do it? She explores the questions of why do humans need sports? Why running specifically? And what did the Greeks use running for? So the book is kind of broken up into these parts of her thoughts and journaling of her running experience from starting as a casual runner who ran, I think she said like 3 or 4 times a week. She kind of averaged 5 miles every run, but she never had plans to go more than that. And then one day she just decided she wanted to do the Athens Marathon. So part of it is her journey through that, what her thoughts are through every step of the training process. And the other part of it is exploring greater themes of humanity, the history behind certain things. And it starts with this book, On the Art of Gymnastics by Philostratus. Philostratus, an ancient Greek, wrote a book called On the Art of Gymnastics, Why We Need to Move Our Bodies, which is a really interesting concept to think about that early in humanity, in human civilization, that there was, in philosophizing about every aspect of life, they were also philosophizing about the movement of the body, kinetics. Philostratus even mentions that he thinks the beginning of the end of the greatness of Greeks came from weakness in the bodies that he was seeing around him in his contemporaries that led to flaccid minds. So his theory is that if your body is weak and lazy, so will your mind be, even to the point of a downfall of a society because people aren't thinking enough. With COVID and contemporary times, I mean, we see that a lot. We were trapped in our houses for an extended period of time. We let our bodies go weak. We let our bodies go lazy. And that one was a product of what was. We couldn't really do much about that. But we see increasingly in society that we have more access to exercise than ever before, and yet there are increasing rates of sedentary lifestyles, People are just trying to even walk 5,000 steps a day, which it shouldn't be as hard as it is. But, a lot of our life caters to comfort and to leisure. So what does that say about our society, that we are falling into the same fallacy that Philostratus is bringing up, that a weak body means a weak mind? And even with exercise movements and trends, a lot of it is for aesthetics. People lift weights to look a certain way or to get their muscles to a certain strength. What do we do it all for? That is the question that Andrea's exploring here. And I don't think she comes up with a straight answer that applies to everybody, but I think she's exploring, especially, why does she run? What is she doing it for? And with that, she takes her personal experience and the philosophies of the ancients to put together a general idea of why we might be doing it. So why we run? Andrea's first thing that she explores is a fear of dying. Running, especially long distances, makes you feel something. You feel your heart pumping. You feel your muscles get sore. You feel yourself pushing to the edge of pain. And it makes you feel alive. Because every other time of the day, you might be consumed in your thoughts. You might not be present in your actual body that you are living in, and you might not be acknowledging all of the systems that have to be functioning for you to be alive. Next, she explores what the natural instinct is. Looking at children. Children are running constantly, and they're doing it for fun. So why do we run? Instinctively, we're either running towards something that we love or we're running away from something that we fear. Children and animals, they run to survive or to have fun. They do not run to stay in shape. Why has our mindset shifted towards running as a way to stay in shape rather than running as something that is inherent to us as animals, as creatives? And Andrea also explores the idea that running is a way to prove to ourselves that we can do hard things. We are obsessed with constantly improving ourselves. So maybe the instinct to run and to do long distance running and to continually extend what long distance running means, aka marathons to ultra marathons in treacherous conditions, to Ironmans. We keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible. And that might come out of a collective need to continuously prove to ourselves that we can do more. We can do hard things. In the next section, she talks about why the Greeks were in shape. And there's a very simple answer for it. War. There was a constant threat of war for all of these ancient civilizations. War was a very real possibility and was something that was almost always continuously happening. And even in times of peace, they were preparing for times of war. Luckily, today, I would say that few civilizations are running to survive or outlast. I mean, there are exceptions. There's a tribe that lives in the Sahara that literally just runs as a way to survive. They hunt. They are nomadic people. They are running long distances to reach the next destination to survive. And it's a paradox, of putting ourselves through something extremely rigorous that we know will break down our body, that we know will be hard, and we win nothing at the end of it. Whereas the Greeks had something to win. Their lives, their civilizations to win if they were not in shape. It's a very interesting thing with a contemporary view of it all. I mean, we have the privilege, the luxury of running for fun. In ancient Greece as well, she speaks about the idea that athletic valor kind of surpassed military valor, because athletic valor meant that not only you had the military strength and fortitude to win in battle, but athletic valor meant you also had the morals of discipline, of consistency, of trying to be your best self. So it was seen as something that was a lot more valuable and prideful for the ancient Greeks. And that's where something like the Olympics came out of. These games of athletic prowess, yes, they were for glory, but in that glory, they were games to show readiness for war. So oftentimes people like Achilles were venerated as these great warriors, not because they had any military, they did have military rank, but because they were athletically valorous. Achilles was called swift-footed. He was fast. He was agile. And that's what they valued above all else. Like I said, the first marathon wasn't run to show off that prowess. It was run out of necessity to carry a message that we have won. If Philippides hadn't been prepared to run that 25 miles, which at the end he was not, but that message would never have reached Athens. So that's what they were always preparing for, is something of either carrying a message or going to war. Plato, in his writing, The Laws, says that we are always at war. And even at times of peace, we're lying to ourselves that we are not at war. In that line of thinking, if we are not in literal war, what are we preparing for? As contemporary runners, what are we preparing for? Marcolongo's argument is that war for us must come from within. That because we do not have an external threat of war, there must be an internal threat of war. That we are constantly trying to prove to ourselves that we can endure. She goes on to say about ancient sports competitions, they were relatively short. In these early Olympics, I'm not sure if there were specific names for other athletic games, but the long distance running events were like 3 miles. Like that, a 5K was the epitome of athletic prowess. And that is shocking for I go on a 5K run when I just want to feel good. That's my afternoon run. But for them, long distance running was not something that they even comprehended. They were doing other exercises and of course exercising, but long distance running was something so out of the ordinary. And that's why it's so interesting that we have taken that up as kind of the thing that people want to do if they are trying to reach a higher level of thinking or prove to themselves that they can run a marathon or reach this bucket list item. So in that endurance, we're evolving to continuously endure. And it seems to just be getting more extreme. Greeks also had this idea of human limitation, of the human condition. And to them, at least according to Marcolongo, it would have been scandalous to try and push beyond what the human condition was. So to them, running a marathon would have been seen as you are trying to be a god. And that is scandalous. That is, you are not being a human being. They were constantly trying to prepare for war, but not beyond what they knew was a human limitation. So why have we taken it a step further to continuously endure beyond what's possible? Within the war, internally, Marcolongo talks about taking time and taming time, and that there are rarely times in our life that a minute feels as long as it does when you're in the middle of a long run or when you're doing a plank. You feel every single second of that minute. And while it can be incredibly frustrating, especially when you're at the end of a race and you're like, oh my God, there's 5 minutes left. Those 5 minutes feel impossible. But it's also unlocked something in us that we have the power to literally slow down time for ourselves. Not in a metaphysical way, but in an internal perception of time. We can slow it down by taking on these extremely difficult tasks and putting ourselves through moments where we are forced to acknowledge every single second of time. And Marcolongo treats that as something beautiful, that we are able to transcend and access the fleeting nature of time in our lives. She also talks about the disparities of running as a woman, which is so real. Biologically, people who are born female have to deal with hormonal changes that maybe affect your time or your pace or how you feel during a run. It is not suggested that you prep for a marathon and be pregnant at the same time. And Marcolongo talks about this a lot, this extreme frustration as she was trying to get pregnant with her partner, that she had to choose between being a mother and doing a marathon. And she said it's not that the actual choice mattered to her, but it was the extreme frustration that she had to make a choice. It was either or. And that a man would never have to consider that thing. No matter how empathetic he is of his pregnant wife, a man will never have to go through the bodily changes of that. He will never have to consider the life growing inside of him or training for something that I want to do. This leads to her researching just the overall disparity of women in sports in general. In the ancient Olympics, women weren't allowed to participate. They weren't even allowed to spectate. And in fact, they didn't even get to spectate until the aspect of money was put in, because there were rich women who were wanting to place bets on sports. So actually, sports betting is what brought women into sports, which is kind of funny because you only want women when they're useful to you and not when they are just a human being to participate. The only races that women were really doing in those times were sort of religious, for religious purposes, to symbolize coming into adulthood. Or there was one that she talked about where women had to literally run from a bear to show Artemis, whose animal was a bear apparently, the god of the hunt, that you were ready to become a woman because you outran her bear. Which is like so crazy. Women were only allowed to participate in like religious ceremonies. And the prizes that they would often win were having men spectate and seeing how strong they were and choosing their wife out of that. So it's a very different to a man being able to go to a competition and be like, let me show you my pride and glory of being strong, and a woman having to settle for a man as a trophy. In Rome, women were actually allowed to participate in 186 BC, which is crazy to think about. But once Christianity took over, women weren't allowed in the Olympics until 1900. So think about that. From, I don't know when Christianity definitively took over, according to this, but that is more than 2,000 years. It took 2,000 years for women to be able to participate again. That is crazy. She also brings up the legacy of Catherine Switzer, the first woman who signed up for an all-male marathon in 1947, because she used initials for her first name. So she showed up on the starting line in red lipstick and a purposefully feminine outfit, and people literally tackled her to try to get her to stop running. There were people shouting at her. The organizer of the race told her to get the hell out of his race. And she said, if I need to finish this, even if I'm crawling on my hands and knees, because if I don't, they will say that women can't do it. And her legacy. This was 1947. That was less than 100 years ago, that women were not allowed to compete in the same realm as men. And then there's the disparity of how exercise is marketed towards women. We know that there's a lot of body shaming, that women have an impossible ideal to try and uphold within society. And there's also the aspect of, I never really noticed this before, but Marcolongo was talking about athletic clothes and how all of these athletic clothes marketed towards women are often showing a lot of skin. They are skin tight. They're hot pink. They are pastels. They're trying to feminize the woman, which isn't a bad thing. But the difference in a man, having outfits that are built for performance and a woman having outfits that are built for aesthetic is very prevalent in athletic wear that we see today. Not always. There are clothes and shoes and things that are made for performance for women, but oftentimes aesthetics takes the foreground for marketers and for producers. And it makes sense because people buy and people want to look cute and people want to show off. And all of this leads towards a sexualization of women. Marcolongo talks about how running is such a public sport. You're literally running down the streets of wherever you live for the most part, unless you're running on a treadmill, you are running in public. So through these outfits, through catcalling and ogling and the jokes that we see in movies of people watching women's breasts jiggling when they're jogging or their butts being so firm in leggings. And I mean, there was even in history, they had women participate naked and men participate naked just to make sure a woman wasn't competing. And that idea that women, it goes back to that thing of, I think it was the German swim team that showed up in like fully long pants, long sleeve swimwear just to protest the idea that it was gymnastics, that women's gymnastics had to be tight, high-cut leotards that sparkled and were appealing to mostly male audiences. The idea of women being sexualized in sports I mean, we've seen it with volleyball teams as well. They want to wear longer shorts. They don't want to literally wear bikini bottoms when they're playing sports. That is not an aspect of the game that at all matters. So why are we putting ourselves through public sexualization? We deserve the same decency that men get. Throughout all this, by the way, marcolongo's again sprinkling in her thoughts while running, how she's starting to feel powerful. She's starting to feel the pain and wondering why the hell she's doing this, and realizing she's not quick, she's not fast. And that brings it to the next section of what does it mean to be born to run? She argues that it is our greatest democratic accomplishment as human beings because it meant that once we began to run as bipedal animals, anyone was able to outrun a predator, anyone was able to run to get food, anyone was able to escape. She also talks about how once you begin to run, you start realizing that your body comes alive in a way that you didn't really know before. Like, you start to notice that you are hungry for certain things, that you're hungrier more frequently, that you need to rest to feel good the next day, that it needs to be utilized. You start to feel it when you don't exercise, that your body's craving a little bit of that resistance. And she talks about like being so present in your body that she feels alive for the first time. And it's again that idea of chasing death away. She also talks about what it is to be a natural at something. She comes to the realization that sometimes there is a natural limit to the talent that you possess, and it's coming to terms with what that limitation is. That is so painful sometimes. And I agree with that. Like, I know that I will never be a competitive runner. I'm never going to participate in the Olympics, and I'm fine with that because I know that that's not me. Even my running time now is like pretty slow. And it's also being a natural. It's hard to see running as being instinctive for us, you know? There's the paradox of every time we run or do something hard, we complain. Everyone says, I have to go for a run. I have to do this many miles today. I have to run this long. No one's making us. We don't have to do it for survival anymore, but we always end up feeling better afterwards. So maybe it's that connection of body to mind that is instinctual here. And maybe it's the idea of coming up with games that marcolongo talks about. Running is a constant game. You can constantly level up for yourself, you know, like in a video game, or you can create different ways to run. You know, you can do running splits, you can do intervals, you can do hills. You are rarely repeating the same thing anytime. Even if you're running the same route with the same distance at the same time, the weather is going to be different. There's going to be different people out there. There's going to be different animals out there. Every single time it's like a different game. And maybe that's where it instinctually comes from, that we have a constant need to play, to think creatively, to prove to ourselves that we can accomplish something. Maybe that's why running out of every other sport is one that people can do for years and years and years and years and years, because it will constantly change. And that is exciting to us as human beings. And for the average runner, it's devoid of any real competition. So it truly is just for fun. There aren't a lot of us who are out there competing professionally or entering races for the opportunity to win. I've been thinking about signing up for a marathon, and if I do, my goal is literally to just finish. I am not expecting to be up there with the top women racers. And that is something that's also so individual about running, is that I think it's the only sport where on the same starting line, it can be the elite of the elite with the newest of the new, all competing in the same race. And that's something that's really cool, is it brings us together and it shows that people are really having their own internal race. And she also brings up a good point that even though it does feel like the most democratic of sports, that anyone can do it and anyone can start, there is an elitism there. Biologically, there is elitism that she talks about with certain environments historically creating better runners, how historically most record breakers and record holders are people who have lived on the equator, and what that means. Maybe it's environmental factors that have led to better evolution of VO2 max or oxygen consumption or muscles or, you know, all of these things. So there's a natural elitism. And then there's the elitism of what we've turned running into. All these races require fees. A lot of them require a lottery system if it's a big enough race. If you want to run well, you're told you need to get the right shoes, that you need to have this outfit to run your fastest. You need to have gels and snacks and apps and certain headphones. It's so contradictory to what we think of as working hard to be the best. at the end of the day, like, some people just have more natural talent. They have a natural innate ability. People with longer legs than me have a natural ability to run farther than me. And that's fine. But it's that disparity of contradiction that if we work hard enough, we can achieve whatever we set out to do. But also understanding the limitations of what we come across. The next section she talks about is in corpore sano, in a healthy body. She goes back to Philostratus and on the art of gymnastics. And Philostratus says that practicing sports leads people to think more clearly about other aspects of their life that they might not think about, like diet and sleep, creating a ripple effect of benefits, which is really true. Marcolongo also talks about the extreme of that we've gone to, of these wellness trends and fads and all of these supplements you can take, and trying to eat less meat or go vegan or a keto diet or taking creatine or collagen or all of these different things that we give ourselves not naturally, kind of takes away the joy of living and spontaneity, and that we are choosing health over pleasure, which arguably is a good thing for some people, but it also just comes back to the idea that we are so afraid of dying that we are afraid of living. We are pushing away death so hard that it can't help but remind us that we are going to die. We push away death so hard that we take away our joy of living. I know people who wouldn't touch a burger and fries because they're on a specific diet for a specific sport. It makes me a little bit sad. I mean, if they're happy living their life that way, all kudos to you. But it makes me sad that you deny yourself the pleasure of living for the possibility of extending your life a little bit. There's compromise and there is balance in both. And I don't think one is necessarily right or wrong. I think it's all about balance. And Marcolongo also talks about the realization that, like, in speaking about the body, there is a collaborativeness with the ancients and a closeness she feels with the ancients, because regardless of anything else, the body that we have today is the same body that they had 2,000 years ago. It's weird to think about that all of these people that you read about and think about were humans in physical bodies, and like they were people too. Marcolongo talks about that as making her feel more in her body than ever before. And also thinking about running as giving her a way to realize that nature exists. Which sounds so dumb, but it's true, because like I said, most of the time you're running outdoors. You are forced to be in nature, whether you like it or not, and whether you live in a city or not, there's nature all around. And she said something that I never comprehended, but I knew subconsciously as a runner. But like, you are forced to confront the seasons and the weather and the air around you, what kinds of views you like to see and what kinds of trees you like to be around. And being a runner for me and for Marcolongo has been something that it's made the seasons feel natural. It's made weather not feel as abrupt. You're being one with nature every day that you run. So no longer does it feel like you've been inside all day and you're going out into the freezing cold, but you're confronting the cold and you're like, oh, today's a little bit colder than yesterday. But in the grand scheme of things, it makes sense. Nature has a rhythm and it makes sense. And you start to become an inhabitant of it rather than an observer of it. So that's something really beautiful that she finds, that why we might run is to feel a part of nature. And going back to the limitations, she says, like running has taught her that everyone has their limits that they naturally can do. But it's how we push ourselves within those limits that shows strength of moral and our obligation to continuously improve. Her kind of final exploration into running is the idea of aesthetics and glory, and how in ancient Greece, they never really won a prize for the most part. These competitions were done to prove your glory. And it was really important for the Greeks that glory above life was valued. There was a quote from someone in the book, an ancient, who wrote a letter that said, if you hear that your son is dead, then mourn him. But if you hear that he did not fight well, never believe it. It was so important for them to have pride in their bodies, in their performance. And that has kind of evolved into, without the threat of war, it has evolved into pride and glory in your aesthetics. And we continuously choose this pain. There's something contemporarily about the glory of like no pain, no gain. We feel pride when we do something really hard and really painful, because it proves to other people that we have done something really hard. And internally, it proves to ourselves that we can do something really hard. And it goes back to Philostratus's argument that there's a link between knowledge and movement. I mean, from the Greeks to Montaigne to current day, there's an inherent connection between people who think you need sports to be able to be a better thinker. People talk about it all the time, that they go running to clear their head, that they go to help their thoughts slow down, to physicalize your train of thought. Greeks thought if you don't use your body, your mind will go flaccid. If you don't use your mind, your body cannot improve. So running is extremely hard, but the payoff is peace of mind, and it's just how far we're willing to go to get that. And she also talks about the disparity between the culture, increasingly interested in athleisure and sportswear and sports brands, but not wanting to do the work required to earn those things. How, I mean, back in even like 20, 30 years ago, you wouldn't really see, I would say more like 40, 50 years ago, you wouldn't really see people out in athleisure wear or in sportswear unless you were in a sport or competing in those sports. And now we want the aesthetic of what it means to be an athlete without ever putting in the work to do that. And I think it goes to the philosophy of what Philostratus is arguing, that we are increasingly not using our bodies, but we want to prove that maybe we could, but that is leading to our minds not creating new thoughts or our synapses coming together. Are we living in this illusion that we are healthy and sound of body and mind when really we are fooling ourselves into thinking that because we wear athletic wear that we are in shape in body and mind? And there's also like the pressure and the aesthetics of our own goals. We are constantly looking at our times and our pace and our breathing and our steps, and our smartwatches are tracking it and our apps are tracking it, and what shoes are we going to wear to get the best result. All of these aesthetics, rather than thinking about the simple process of running helps me clear my mind. It helps me think. And I think that's really what the core of what Marcolongo wants to get to the heart of is we're running for what it does for our mind. So why are we fooling ourselves with all these external factors? Why are we competing so hard with nothing when we can achieve the end goal within ourselves? The last part of the book goes into her getting to Greece and running the marathon. The shock of finally getting to that moment when you've spent so much time and energy preparing for it. In a few hours, it'll be done. And what happens when it's done? She explores, even when we think our body's at the limit, there is still something left to give. And that's an incredibly profound lesson that you can only learn putting yourself in a position like that. Somehow your body will still continue to give more. She also talks about the weirdness that it was the hardest pain of her life. And yet a few weeks after, she could not remember what that pain felt like. But she also couldn't remember the joy. She couldn't remember the pleasure of reaching the end goal after she put so much time and energy into reaching it. She was glad it was over. And then what? And all of this comes to kind of her conclusion of maybe that is why we run, because we are never going to be satisfied with a result, and there's always something more to go to. So all of this was an exploration for her, rather than coming up with a concrete thesis or an answer on why we run, but rather an exploration of what running meant to the Greeks and what it means to her, and how we can take those lessons that we can learn from running into our contemporary lives. You know, I also don't know why I started to run. I mean, one day I just did, and I still remember exactly how proud, I think I was prouder of running 4 miles continuously than I was when I finished any of my half marathons that I've run. The pride in proving to myself that I can go beyond what I had set as a mental wall was so freeing. It really rings true to me that like even when I don't want to run, I get so much mental clarity. I feel pleasure in reaching these goals, in constantly improving myself for no one else. And it leads back to my words of dedication and consistency, proving that you can, that your body can do hard things even when it doesn't want to. It reminds me to be present. It reminds me that I am alive, that I am a part of nature, that the seasons come and go, that the temperature will change, that I will see new things every single day that I am alive. And I do want to run a marathon. I don't know why I want to run a marathon. I don't know why, after how painful it is that every single person in my entire life have said it's the worst pain of their entire life, and they wanted to cry and they wanted to like poop themselves on the trail. Why does that sound appealing to me? And I think it's to prove to myself that I can. And that's what I get out of all of these people. That's what I get out of Marco Longo's exploration into why we contemporarily run and what we can learn from the Greeks of preparation for war against ourselves and preparing for the worst, even in the best of times. Because if I can prepare for the worst, then it won't be that bad when it comes. I know my limits. Again, I know I'm not going to be a competitive runner, but I also know that I can keep trying and keep improving, and that I still have more left to give. And I'll end it with this quote from the book that Marco Longo says, "In the end, you stop walking and you start moving faster just to outrun whatever's ailing you, to defy it, to dominate it, to make it see who's in command. Once again, thanks to running, I can say I've won. At least until tomorrow." It's hard to talk about philosophy and history because, again, it's like there isn't a clear thesis here, but rather many ideas that are being thought about and explored. Why do you run if you run? Do you want to run? Do you want to start a run club? Should I join a run club? I can't even join a book club. I can't do a run club as well. Thank you so much for joining me on my first book review of 2026, and I will see you next month. Who knows what genre we'll try next? Bye.